Title: The Quiet Ones. The clock struck midnight as David closed the bar and locked the doors. Outside, the streets of the small town were eerily quiet, shrouded in a mist that seemed to glow under the pale light of the moon. He turned to head home, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound accompanying him. It had been a long day, and David was exhausted. He passed the old cemetery, his shortcut home, and paused. Normally, he'd walk around it, but tonight something drew him in. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way the mist swirled through the wrought iron gates or the faint flicker of light deep within the grounds. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside. The air turned cold. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the earth was trying to pull him into it. The graves seemed to lean closer, their cracked stones whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. Then he saw her. A woman in a tattered white dress sat on a gravestone, her head bowed. Her long black hair cascaded over her face, hiding her features. She clutched a bundle of wilted flowers to her chest. David froze. "Ma'am?" he called out hesitantly. She didn't respond. He took a cautious step closer. "Are you all right? It's late, and it's not safe out here." The woman slowly lifted her head, and David's breath hitched. Her eyes were hollow, like dark voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. Her lips didn't move, but her voice echoed in his mind. "Why are you here?" David stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. "I was just passing through. I didn't mean to intrude." She tilted her head, studying him. "You shouldn't be here." Before he could respond, shadows began to rise from the ground. They took the shapes of people, men, women, children, all of them staring at him with those same hollow eyes. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, as though they were marionettes controlled by unseen strings. David turned and ran, the path twisting and shifting under his feet. The gates were nowhere in sight. Instead, he found himself in the heart of the cemetery, surrounded by towering mausoleums and crumbling gravestones. The shadows closed in, their voices a cacophony of whispers. "Why are you here? You don't belong. Leave us." He backed up against a mausoleum, his hands searching for something, anything to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a rusted lantern. He grabbed it and swung it wildly, the faint flame inside casting eerie, dancing light across the spectral figures. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice trembling. But they didn't stop. Instead, they parted, and the woman in the white dress stepped forward. Her face had changed, her mouth stretched impossibly wide, rows of jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here because you're not one of us," she hissed. David screamed as her hand shot out, claw-like fingers closing around his wrist. He felt a cold, searing pain as she dragged him down, the ground beneath him splitting open. Darkness swallowed him whole. David woke with a start, gasping for air. He was lying on a patch of grass, the cemetery silent and still. The mist was gone, replaced by the soft light of dawn. For a moment, he thought it had all been a nightmare. He stood, brushing himself off, and made his way to the gate. As he walked, he noticed something strange. People were milling about on the streets, neighbors, friends, people he'd known his entire life, but they didn't seem to notice him. He called out to a man walking his dog, but the man kept going, his gaze fixed ahead. Panic set in. He waved his arms, shouted, but no one responded. Then he saw the posters. They were plastered on walls and lampposts, faded but legible. Memorial service for David Green. Gone too soon. Beneath the words was his picture. David's legs gave out, and he fell to the ground, his mind reeling. He remembered now the car accident 2 weeks ago, the sensation of impact, the blinding light. He hadn't made it. He turned back toward the cemetery where the woman in white waited just inside the gate. She smiled, her hollow eyes now filled with a strange kindness. "You're one of us now," she said softly. The shadows gathered around him, no longer threatening but welcoming. As the realization sank in, David stood and took a step toward the gate, leaving the world of the living behind. And the town, as it always had, carried on, blissfully unaware of the quiet ones who walked among them.